The first time Amina stepped into David's apartment, she noticed the light. It wasn't just the sunlight filtering through the wide windows overlooking the restless city below. It was softer than that, warmer, like something curated, intentional. Candles lined the windowsill, unlit but ready. A small brass menorah stood on a shelf, polished to a quiet shine. Books, so many books, leaned against each other in familiar disarray, their spines whispering histories she didn't yet know. "You keep your place like a memory," she said, setting her bag down carefully, as if the room itself might bruise. David smiled, a little shy, a little proud. "My grandmother used to say a home should remember you even when you're gone." Amina let that settle between them. "In my family, we say a home is where prayers linger in the walls." "Then maybe," he said, stepping closer, "this place is halfway to becoming something real." She laughed softly, but her eyes held something deeper, something hopeful, something cautious. Because love, she had learned, was never just about two people. They met, like so many modern love stories do, across distance and doubt. Amina lived in a coastal town where the call to prayer stitched the day together in sacred intervals. Her life was defined by rhythms, family dinners, market mornings, quiet evenings on the rooftop under a sky heavy with stars. Tradition wasn't something she questioned, it was something she carried. David, on the other hand, lived in a world of constant motion. His days blurred into meetings, deadlines, subway rides, but beneath that pace was something rooted, something steady, his family's traditions, carried across generations like heirlooms that couldn't be seen but were always felt. They found each other in a space that felt suspended between worlds. Conversations that began casually, favorite foods, childhood stories, grew into something deeper. They spoke of faith not as doctrine, but as memory, as feeling, as the quiet ways people hold on to what matters. "Do you ever feel?" Amina asked once, her voice hesitant through the screen. "Like you belong to something older than yourself?" "All the time," David said, "and sometimes I think, maybe that's the point, we're not meant to stand alone." It was in those moments that the distance seemed smaller. Not gone, but smaller. The first real test came with the holidays. Amina had grown up celebrating with her entire extended family, cousins spilling into hallways, laughter rising above the clatter of dishes. Traditions followed not because they were written down, but because they lived in everyone's bones. David's celebrations were different, but no less meaningful. They were quieter, more intimate, candles lit with intention, prayers spoken in a language that carried centuries within it, stories told and retold, each time with new meaning. "How do we do this?" Amina asked one evening, her voice tight with the weight of the question. "Do what?" "Be both," she said, without losing either. David didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles across her palm. "Maybe we don't try to be both at once," he said finally. "Maybe we take turns teaching each other who we are. And if we don't understand?" she asked. "Then we ask," he said, "and we listen, and we try again." She searched his face, looking for certainty. What she found instead was something more honest. Willingness. It would have to be enough. The first time Amina celebrated with David's family, she felt like an echo in a room full of voices. They were kind, so kind it almost made things harder. Smiles that lingered a second too long. Questions that were gentle but careful, as if she might break under the wrong word. "Tell us about your family," his mother said, passing her a plate. Amina hesitated. Where could she begin? With the sound of her mother singing in the kitchen? With her father's quiet strength? With the way her grandmother's stories blurred history and myth until they became something sacred? "They are everything," she said finally. His mother smiled. "That's a good place to start." Later, as candles flickered and prayers filled the room, Amina watched David, the way his voice softened as he spoke, the way his eyes closed, not in performance, but in something deeply personal. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the feeling. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a witness. When David visited Amina's home, the experience was anything but quiet. He was welcomed with an intensity that left him both overwhelmed and strangely comforted. Her family moved around him like a current, feeding him, asking questions, laughing at his attempts to keep up. "Eat," her mother insisted, placing another dish in front of him. "I'm trying," he said, laughing. "I really am." Amina watched from across the room, her eyes soft. There was something vulnerable about seeing him here, in her world, something that made the stakes feel real in a way they hadn't before. Later, on the rooftop, the noise of the house faded into the background. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded. "I've never felt so out of place," he admitted. "And so, welcome." She smiled. "That's how you know it matters." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "I want to do this right," he said, "not just for us, for them too." "Then you have to understand," she said gently, "this isn't just about love." "I know," he said, "it's about everything that comes with it." The challenges didn't disappear. There were conversations that stretched into the early hours, filled with questions that didn't have easy answers, about faith, about expectations, about what it meant to build a life that honored both where they came from and where they were going. There were moments of frustration, of fear. "What if we're trying to build something that can't exist?" Amina asked once, her voice barely above a whisper. David shook his head. "Or maybe we're building something that hasn't existed yet." She looked at him, searching for doubt. There was none. Only that same quiet willingness. The night they decided to create their own tradition, it started with candles. "Not for any specific holiday," David said, setting them on the table. "Just, for us." Amina tilted her head. "Is that allowed?" He smiled. "I think we're allowed to make something new." She considered that, then nodded. They lit the candles together, the small flames flickering to life in the dim room. "For your family," he said. "For yours," she replied. "And for us," he added. They stood there for a moment, the silence filled not with emptiness, but with presence. "Say something," he said. "Like a prayer? Or a wish," he said, "or a promise." Amina closed her eyes, her voice steady. "May we never forget where we come from," she said, "but may we also never be afraid of where we're going." David swallowed, then spoke. "May we choose each other," he said, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." They opened their eyes at the same time. And in that moment, something shifted. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Years later, their home held both echoes and beginnings. The menorah still stood on the shelf, now beside a collection of objects Amina had brought with her: textiles, photographs, small pieces of a life once lived elsewhere. The kitchen smelled like a blend of everything they had learned to share. Their children grew up hearing stories from both sides, learning that identity wasn't something singular, but something layered. "Which one are we?" their daughter asked once. Amina and David exchanged a glance. "Both," Amina said. "And more," David added. Their daughter frowned. "That's confusing." David smiled. "It is," he said, "but it's also beautiful."